I stood in the shadows of the hibiscus bushes, my breath hitching in my chest as I watched my wife through the floor-to-ceiling French doors of the estate, just 3 houses down from ours. She wasn't holding a blood pressure cuff or a tray of medication for a sick elderly woman. She was wearing a floor-length Vera Wang lace gown and holding a crystal champagne flute. She was laughing, her head tilted back in that specific way she only did when she was truly happy, as a man I'd never seen before wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her shoulder. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up a ghost at my own wife's secret wedding, I have to take you back to the month my entire world turned into a choreographed lie. Elena and I were the couple people pointed to when they wanted to believe in marriage. 10 years. That's a decade of Sunday mornings at the Bluebird Cafe, a decade of I love you texts at 2 p.m. just because, and a decade of building a life in a quiet, upscale cul-de-sac where everyone knew everyone's business. Or so I thought. I'm an architect. I build structures meant to last for centuries, and I thought our foundation was made of granite. We had this routine where we'd walk our golden retriever Cooper every evening, waving to the neighbors, feeling like we had finally made it. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. It was so small I almost didn't feel the ground shift. Elena, who had been a registered nurse for years, came home and told me she'd taken a side gig. She said Mrs. Gable, a wealthy but reclusive widow who lived in the massive Victorian of our street, needed a night sitter. Elena explained that the poor woman was terrified of being alone after a recent fall and needed someone to monitor her vitals from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 4 nights a week. It sounded like Elena, always the caretaker, always wanting to help. But looking back, that was the moment the woman I loved began to vanish. That should have been my first warning, a blinking red light in the dark. But what came next was so much worse. If that had been the only thing, maybe I could have let it go. But over the next 3 weeks, the evidence started stacking up like bricks in a wall between us. It started with the smell. Elena would come home at 6:30 a.m., supposedly after a grueling night of elder care, but she didn't smell like a hospital or a sick room. She didn't smell like antiseptic or old age peppermint. She smelled like Sandal 33, an expensive woody perfume that cost $300 a bottle. When I asked her about it, she didn't even blink. She just said Mrs. Gable liked high-end candles and kept them burning all night. A few nights later, I found something in the trunk of her car while I was looking for the jumper cables. Tucked under the spare tire cover was a garment bag. I zipped it open just an inch and saw white silk and intricate beadwork. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I told myself it was for a gala or maybe a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. I desperately wanted to believe my own excuses. But then I checked her phone while she was in the shower. She changed her passcode, which was a first in 10 years, but she hadn't turned off her notifications. A message popped up from a contact named L. It said, "The caterer confirmed the sea bass. Everything is perfect for Saturday, my queen." My blood went cold. My hands were shaking so violently I had to set the phone down on the nightstand to keep from dropping it. I felt a physical sickness, a cold weight in the pit of my stomach that made it hard to breathe. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to scream, and I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be patient. I was going to see just how deep this rabbit hole went.
The next day, I took a walk down to Mrs. Gable's house while Elena was sleeping before her shift. I brought a bouquet of lilies, intending to introduce myself to the woman my wife was supposedly caring for. I rang the bell. I waited. I rang again. Finally, a man in a polo shirt opened the door. He looked confused. I asked for Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Gable?" he asked, tilting his head. "The Gables moved to a retirement community in Florida 3 months ago. I'm the property manager. We're actually renting this place out for high-end events and short-term stays now." The ground didn't just shift then. It opened up and swallowed me whole. I managed to stammer an apology and walk away, my legs feeling like lead. Elena wasn't sitting with a widow. She wasn't at work. She was 3 houses down, in a house that was being used for events. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was a production. I spent the next 3 days acting completely normal. I kissed her goodbye at 9:45 p.m. I told her to have a quiet shift. I even packed her a little Tupperware of pasta for her lunch at midnight. She looked me right in the eye, smiled that beautiful, treacherous smile, and told me she'd see me for breakfast. She had no idea that I had already spent the afternoon at a private investigator's office, or that I had spent my savings on a high-end camera with a telephoto lens. She had no idea that I was done being the husband who trusted too much. Saturday arrived. Our 10th anniversary was technically on Monday, but Saturday was the night of the big shift she'd been talking about. She spent the afternoon at the spa, preparing for a long weekend of work. I watched her get ready with a kind of detached, clinical fascination. I watched her pack a small suitcase. I watched her leave at 7 p.m., 3 hours early, claiming Mrs. Gable had a family emergency and needed her sooner. I waited exactly 30 minutes. Then I put on my darkest suit, the one I'd bought for a funeral I never thought would be my own marriage's, and I walked down the street. The Gable house was transformed. Strings of fairy lights draped the ancient oaks in the front yard. Luxury SUVs lined the curb. A valet stand was set up at the end of the driveway. I didn't go through the front. I knew the layout of these Victorian homes. I'm an architect, after all. I slipped through the side gate and moved through the shadows of the garden. The back of the house was all glass, a modern addition to the old structure. And there she was. The room was filled with about 40 people. There was a small altar draped in white roses. A man, Leo, I presumed, stood there, looking at Elena with a gaze so full of adoration it made me want to vomit. He was younger than me, wealthy-looking, with the kind of tan you only get from spending Tuesdays on a yacht. Elena was radiant. She was wearing the white dress I'd seen in the trunk. She was walking down a makeshift aisle, holding a bouquet of anemones. I stood there in the dark, the humid night air clinging to my skin, watching my wife marry another man. My ears were ringing so loudly I can barely hear the music. It was a commitment ceremony, a sham wedding. She wasn't legally marrying him, obviously, but she was promising him a life. She was living a double existence, playing the role of the devoted suburban wife by day and the glamorous, high-society new bride by night. I didn't wait for them to say their vows. I didn't want to hear her lie to him the way she lied to me. I walked right up to those French doors and I didn't knock. I kicked them. The sound of the heavy wood hitting the frame was like a gunshot. The music stopped instantly. 40 heads turned toward me. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it had physical mass.
I stepped into the room, my shoes clicking on the polished marble. I looked at Elena. I watched the color drain from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hands, still clutching that bouquet, started to tremble so violently that petals began to flutter to the floor. "I realized I forgot to give you your anniversary gift, Elena," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. It sounded like it was coming from someone else, someone much colder than the man who had loved her for a decade. The man, Leo, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Who are you? What is this?" I looked at him. He actually looked like a decent guy, confused, protective. He had no idea he was a prop in her fantasy. "I'm the man who pays the mortgage on the house she goes back to every morning at 6 a.m., I said. I pulled a thick envelope from my jacket pocket and tossed it onto the cake table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to a 3-tier fondant masterpiece. "Those are the photos from the last 3 nights, the ones where she isn't night-sitting for a widow, but is instead scouting locations with you, Leo. And the marriage license from 10 years ago is in there too, just in case you thought this was a costume party." Elena finally found her voice, but it was a thin, ragged thing. "David, please, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "It looks like a wedding, Elena," I said, gesturing to the white roses, the champagne, and her Vera Wang gown. "And you look like a bride. The problem is, you're already a wife." She took a step toward me, her eyes darting to the guests, then back to me, looking for a way to spin this. She tried to reach for my hand, her face contorting into a mask of desperate sorrow. "I was going to tell you. I felt so trapped, David. I needed to be someone else. He made me feel—" "I don't care how he made you feel," I interrupted. I looked at Leo, whose face had gone from confusion to a mask of sheer, humiliated rage. He looked at Elena, then at the envelope, then back at her. He didn't say a word. He just backed away from her as if she were made of glass and already shattering. The guests began to whisper, a low hiss of scandal that filled the room. I looked at Elena one last time. In that light, in that expensive dress, surrounded by her lies, she looked like a stranger. I didn't feel the urge to yell. I didn't feel the urge to break anything.
I just felt a profound, hollow sense of relief. The secret was out. The structure had collapsed. "The locks are changed," I said quietly, loud enough only for her to hear. "Your things are in the garage. Cooper is with my mother. Don't come back to my house." I turned around and walked out the way I came. I didn't look back to see her fall to her knees, and I didn't stay to hear Leo demand his money back from the wedding planner. I walked down the street, past the familiar houses of my neighbors, and for the first time in a month, I could breathe. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It turns out Leo was a wealthy tech executive she'd met at a medical conference a year prior. She'd told him she was a widow. She'd built an entire persona for him, a whole tragic backstory that didn't include a husband who made her pancakes on Saturdays. She lost everything in the end. Leo sued her for the money he'd spent on their life together, and she lost her job at the hospital after the scandal went public.
As for me, I sold the house in the cul-de-sac. I moved to the city, into a loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the skyline, not a neighbor's backyard. Sometimes I still catch the scent of Santal 33 on the breeze, and for a split second, my heart tightens. But then I remember the sight of her in that white dress, trembling among the anemones, and I realize that the person I loved never actually existed. I'm building something new now, not for a century, and not for anyone else, just for me. And this time, I'm making sure the foundation is real.